Ajnanatimirandasya Gnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuram Niritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Devo Maheshwara Guru Sakshat Param Brahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Dhyanamulam Guru Mutti Puja Mulam Guru Padam Mantramulam Guru Vakyam Mokshamulam Guru Kripa. Om Namah Shivaya Gurave Satchidananda Murtaye Nishprapanchaya Shantaya Niralambaya Tejase. Om Sanavavato Sanobhanakto Saviryam Karavave Tejasvinavadhitamastu Vitvishave. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So my humble prostrations to Sri Gurudev Swami Shivanji Maharaj, Sri Swami Venkatesananda Maharaj, Swami Vidyananda Maharaj, Swami Krishnananda Maharaj, and all the wonderful illustrious disciples of Sri Gurudev Swami Shivananda. Also my humble prostrations to Sri Swami Yoga Swarupanandaji Maharaj, our president, and all the senior Swamijis and Swamijis of our ashram. Also to Sri Yogeshwari Mataji and Swami Parvatananda Mataji, the spiritual heads of our Ananda Kutiya ashram, who introduced me to the teachings of Sri Swami Venkatesananda Maharaj, and also my humble prostrations to all of you. And I'm very happy to be part of the retreat, more so as a participant, as a listener, rather than a speaker. But I do want to thank Swami Amritarupananda Mataji. She said, I was gracious to accept. I feel the other way around. I feel it was her who was gracious to invite someone like me to speak at a retreat of this nature. So I'm very, very grateful to Swami Amritananda Rupanandaji Mataji for inviting us to also do a sharing at this retreat on this topic of transcending challenges and suffering. And I was also very happy that Mataji said in the orientation, as well as now, that it's more of my understanding of Swami Venkatesananda's teachings. I cannot claim to be his representative and know what he would say on this topic. Having read some books and listening to many talks, I can say one thing, that there is no definite way of knowing exactly what Swami Venkatesananda Maharaj would have said, because he had so many ways of looking at the topic like this, or any topic really. But I thought I would share, again, of course, what I understood and what has helped me in my spiritual life. And also in terms of course, this pandemic. And immediately when the topic came and I was requested to say something, I was reminded of some talks we listened to just recently. And these are the Navaratri talks that Sri Swami Venkatesananda gave in 1982. Every year at Navaratri, Swamiji would talk on a text called the Devi Mahatmya. And every year I've listened to or read a few of his a series of talks. They are different every time, but at this particular talk, Swamiji actually talks about the intellect barrier. And it was so lovely to notice that Swami Amritananda Mataji also mentioned the intellect barrier the other day in her talk. I was almost afraid she was going to take my talk away. So in this talk, Swamiji talks about the problem of the intellect barrier in the pursuit for truth, pursuit of knowledge that we have as seekers. And he takes an analogy which was sort of very apt for our current times. And I'm borrowing this analogy, and please, we should not think of it as a criticism of anyone or anything like that, but it is just so apt. He talks about, he takes three types of people as an example to the intellect barrier. And please, you must remember that it's not really about them, it is about us. Because what is happening outside always happens within also. What is happening in history is actually what is happening within each individual. And he talks about the three people, the philosopher, the politician, and the priest. The philosopher includes the scientists also, and the priest also includes all the religious leaders, really. But all these three are archetypes, one could say, in our own psyche. So in the pursuit for knowledge, for truth, we use the intellect. And the intellect not only reaches a barrier, but the intellect actually becomes a barrier. And this is the way Swamiji explains it. It comes to a point where it does not actually understand the truth. It cannot realize the truth, which means actually it comes face to face with ignorance. But unable to remain with the ignorance, in place of the ignorance, the intellect creates a theory, a philosophy. And I thought this was exactly what happened at the beginning of the pandemic. Scientists were saying, we don't know what this virus is. And incidentally, in the talk, that particular talk I'm referring to, Swamiji even takes the example of, we cannot even know what a virus is. And it will shut us up. The small little something that you cannot see shuts you up. And how it is shutting us up at the moment is unbelievable. Even that we cannot understand. In that non-understanding arises a theory, a philosophy. And what is interesting again, and please again, I'm not criticizing, we're just seeing how this works, how this happens. We remember then what was said, we don't know what this virus is, but we know this much. There comes the theory, there comes the philosophy. And then the next step is, what must we do? So that's where the politician comes in. We must, so taking the philosophy, the knowledge, creating an ideology, and implementing this. And what is the outcome? Suffering. That is the outcome. That's why Swamiji calls philosophers philosophers. The philosopher suffers not only themselves, but also causes suffering. So when the intellect is unable to grasp the truth, regardless of what it is and what it is looking towards, unable to grasp that truth, it invents a theory, a philosophy, and wants to act upon that philosophy. Because once we have created a theory, there is a false sense of knowledge. We suddenly feel, oh, I know. And that makes us feel very comfortable. And the search for truth is abandoned at this point. This is the problem. So and then all we try to do is maintain our theory and our philosophy and keep acting upon that, which is really actually a belief system, continuously, even though even though it is causing ourselves suffering or may even cause others suffering. So, and we can see how this works in our own life. For example, there may be a particular person who's always nasty to me, always gives me a hard time. I wonder why they're like this, pursuit of truth. I wonder why they're like this. What is the truth regarding this question? I don't know why they're like this. But we don't stop there. Oh, they must have some complex. Maybe they've got some complex. I don't know what a complex actually is. This is simply something I'm borrowing from a psychology textbook and pasting this or projecting this onto the person. But now I have knowledge. I think I have knowledge. And having got this knowledge now, I try to amend the way I behave towards this person, this poor person with a complex, and treat that person as if they have a complex. Maybe they don't even have a complex. So this is an example of how we try to deal with, what am I trying to deal with? Why am I worried about how they behave? It's because I'm suffering, I'm hurt by that person's behavior. That is the reality. I'm being hurt. But in order to deal with that hurt, I'm trying to understand it. And not being able to understand it, I look for a theory. I invent a theory and then behave according to that theory. This is also one of the vrittis, actually, in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. It is mentioned that when the mind is not in a state of knowledge, then these vrittis arise. And one of them is, in quotes, right knowledge. Right knowledge may also be understood as knowledge that seems to be right. It has a feeling or a quality of rightness. And so I think I'm right in my knowledge, but actually it is still in the realm of ignorance, because every theory, every philosophy, every vritti is actually in the realm of ignorance. This is very different from the philosophy of yoga or Vedanta. And Swamiji also mentions this in those particular talks, because what we call Vedanta or yoga is actually not, strictly speaking, a philosophy in the way we usually use the word in the Western sense. It is actually a darshana. And darshana means a direct vision or seeing of the reality. It is not a product of the intellect. What we discuss now actually is a product of the intellect. Whereas this darshana, although later on it becomes maybe a kind of philosophy, there's text written, you give it structure and so on, but it is based on a direct vision of the reality. That is why it's called darshana. And then what we may call the philosophy of Adi Shankaracharya or Gurudev's teachings, whatever this is not to be accepted merely as an intellectual knowledge and then us trying to sort of apply it in some way. It is really meant to help us to have that darshana ourselves. That is actually the key thing. Really, to be able to transcend suffering is just to transcend the intellect barrier. As long as we are locked in the intellect, there's suffering. I mean, I think many of us, we have this difficulty, this problem, that when we try to apply the teachings, which we do through the intellect, we find that it is very difficult to apply it. And more often than not, we feel we are failing in our attempt to apply. That's because we're still locked in the intellect. And because we have a feeling, I know now, because I've received the teaching, I know now, the pursuit for truth is abandoned. Whereas actually the teachings that we are receiving are meant to be aids to pursue the path of truth. So what is the truth regarding this coronavirus, this particular pandemic? For me and you, it is felt as a suffering. Although, of course, as I mentioned earlier on, there's, on the one hand, there's the epidemic, the spreading of a virus, and then there's our response to it. So it's really two different things, and we may be suffering from both things. But initially, when it comes to the virus, what is the reality about this virus? I don't know, but possibly the vast majority of the world actually doesn't have a direct experience of this virus unless you yourself have got sick from it. Otherwise, we actually haven't had a real experience of it. But yet, there's anxiety, there's fear. Why is that? That is the reality of the virus for us. The virus itself has not come into view. But what has come into view is our fear. That is the reality. What is it that we are afraid of is death. This was also again mentioned by Swami Amritananda Upananda Mataji, the fear of death. Now, this is a very important phenomena, this fear of death. And incidentally, there might maybe more, and there probably are, but I'm immediately aware of 3 scriptures that actually have the starting point, where death is the starting point for the scripture. One is Bhagavad Gita. There, Arjuna is facing the battlefield and he's staring death in the face. Interestingly enough, he is not really facing his own death as much as the death of others, because his concern is not so much whether I will die or not. In fact, he's been given the boon by Divine Mother that he will succeed in this war. His concern is, I will kill others. Is this not our concern also? If I spread the virus and others die, will I have killed them? Is this not our worry? So, if any of us carry that worry, please, this is the time to pick up the Bhagavad Gita and really study it, because now we are Arjuna. As we go into life and we have this worry that we are killing people, I'm using strong words here, but that is really what it boils down to, isn't it? We're worried about spreading it, we are worried about killing it. What is Sri Krishna's response to this concern? We have to face it. Arjuna also had to face this. And immediately, of course, Sri Krishna begins that teaching in response to that particular problem of death. The other scripture that comes to mind is the Srimad Bhagavatam. There also, there's a king, Parikshit, who has been given a death sentence. In fact, all of us have been given a death sentence. When did we receive our death sentence? The moment we were born, we were given a death sentence. In fact, but unfortunately, it is not so pronounced. But in the case of Sri Parikshit, that was a pronouncement. In 7 days, you will die. Swami Venkatesananda said he had a great blessing actually, because he knew that he had 7 days to live. because of the curse, he knows he's got another 6 or 7 days to live. On the 7th day only he will die. This blessing you and I don't have. We don't know the date. It could be just now. We don't know. So there someone has received a death sentence. And what is the King Parikshit's response to that? He does not try to deny the death. He does not try to avoid the death. He says, let me do the right thing. That is, approach a master and find out, what must I do when I die? When this moment comes, what must I do? This is called facing death. And then the third scripture that also comes to mind is the Katha Upanishad. There, as we know, the story goes that the seeker Nachiketas arrives at the abode of death and meets Lord Yama. Swami Venkatesananda actually explains it that it may be that actually he is having a literal death experience, and that this dialogue is really the experience of death. When the seeker inquires into the nature of death, and as we know, we have this in more recent times with the great sage Sri Ramana Maharishi, who did exactly that. He had the experience of death and inquired into the nature of death. He did not try to avoid it. Oh my goodness, I'm dying. What must I do now? No, what is this death? What is death? What is it that dies? Does anything die? If something dies, what is it? Is there something that survives? This question arises in the heart. But in all of these three scriptures, we see one thing: face the problem. And this is one of the repeated statements that I've read and heard of by Sri Swami Venkatesananda Maharaj. Face the problem. That is the reality right now. It may not be the absolute reality, of course, in the Vedantic sense, but that is what is real to me now. I'm afraid. I'm worried. Face that. Deal with that. And Swami Venkatesananda often talks about the process of vichara when it comes to facing any problem. So let us take this problem now, because this is our common problem. I would think maybe for us it's our common problem now, this problem of death. Facing it. So he takes the approach of vichara, and yeah, he gives a slightly different, maybe, or maybe it's my interpretation, if it's different, maybe it's not, of vichara. And that is a direct observation of that which you are trying to understand without thinking about it. And this is the key thing, without thinking. It's a direct observation into the nature of something. But it may start off with some thinking. Now in the Yoga Sutras, there is the verse, it's verse 17 in the first chapter. And Swamiji often bases his teachings on this particular sutra, which is Vitarka, Vichara, Ananda, Asmita, Anugamat, Samprajñataha. Don't think I'm a Sanskrit scholar. I just spent 20 minutes trying to memorize this verse, this sutra. So first is Vitarka. So Vitarka is now, I'm facing this death thing. But the mind is active, the intellect is active. I don't want to die. What if I die from this virus? So now Vitarka means you counter your thoughts with other thoughts, with counter thoughts. I don't want to die from this virus. Okay. Say if I don't die from this virus, will I not die? Oh. Oh. COVID-19 or no COVID-19, I will die. One day I will die. Of something I will die. Someone will write out a death certificate, died from some cause. I don't know whether you've seen these funny death certificates. I don't know why they have to certify someone is dead. It's fairly obvious, but anyway, they write the certificate that someone is dead, and then they put a cause. What is the real cause of death? Is it a virus? Is it a bacteria? Is it a failing of the heart? There was a song, a funny title. It was called Killed by Death. That is what kills us, is death itself. And maybe that is incomplete. Life kills. Because death is completely part and parcel of life. It cannot be avoided at all. I cannot avoid dying. And neither can I do anything to avoid other people from dying. Finally, I'm not saying we shouldn't maybe save lives. I myself have once saved someone from drowning. I don't know whether they're still alive, but if they're not, they may not be alive now, but certainly one day they won't be. Have I really saved their life? This is Vitarka. We are contemplating now. We're using the intellect. At this point, there's still some chatter because the mind is thinking about it. And it wants to escape also. There's also this escape route that it seeks. But what if this? What if I accept death, will I then not do anything about other people? Then, if you look carefully, the attention has gone away from the problem of the fear of death. And this fear of death is a common problem. It is very deep-seated in all of us. Many of us say, oh, I'm not worried about dying. Wait till the moment comes. And it is there now, we're worried. Wait till you are given that positive test. We won't feel positive. This is something Sivanandashrama mentioned yesterday. We won't feel positive. That is when we know. Abhinivesha, says the Yoga Sutras, which is a very, very, Patanjali says, even the wise ones have this Abhinivesha problem. So we may think we're not worried. Wait till it stares us in the face. So there's this, we're discussing now, okay, is it possible to avoid death? Finally, no. So what is this that is sitting here? It is fear. So what is fear? And again, the mind maybe give suggestions of what is fear, then you give counter suggestion, until the point comes where the mind or the intellect can no longer give any suggestions. It comes to a natural silence. That silence where there's no more chatter in the mind, but a direct observation of that phenomena, which is, say, fear in this example that we're using. You're observing that. What is fear? What is anxiety? What is it? Where does it come from? What is its source? What is its nature? This is the question that is which directs the attention of the mind onto that problem, onto that fear, which is not outside of my hand, is going outside. It's of course within. When this vichara is held steady, there's a steady, constant self-observation, which means observation on that phenomena Swami Venkatesananda describes. First, what may happen is all kinds of images, all kinds of ideas, all kinds of concepts begin to be dispelled. And you can actually become aware of these concepts that we are normally not aware of at all, but that rule our lives. Suddenly we become aware of them. And the moment we become aware of us, they become actually, you may even see them as a picture. It disappears. It disappears. And what is wonderful about this, when these images begin to disappear, they literally, it's like, these are our samskaras actually, they dissolve. Not to trouble us again, because that's also, of course, part of the suffering, is all these samskaras, these self-images that we carry. So all that begins to disappear, because with the vichara, layer of conditioning and of ignorance, these layers of ignorance are removed, the veils are removed little by little, bit by bit. Until you may actually come to a point where suddenly there's no more fear. There's no more anxiety. And this is the magic in this whole thing. We looked at something that is terrifying to look at. That's always the problem with fear and anxiety. We are fearful to look at it. But if we really are able to look at it and observe it, suddenly it is gone. We don't know what has happened to it. It doesn't matter even. At that point, says Swamiji, it is no longer important. What you realize suddenly is the absence of fear, the absence of anxiety, and there is ananda. Vitarka, the sutra, vitarka, vichara, ananda. That is, at that point, one has transcended the pairs of opposites. There's neither pain nor pleasure. There's neither fear. What is the opposite of fear? Courage. That is also not there. I'm not being brave or courageous or anything at that point. It is gone. And that is experienced as a kind of bliss, an ananda. A happiness, Swamiji describes it, happiness which has no opposite. But that is not the end of it. And the problem is that for most of us, that will be the end of the inquiry, the end of the search. Why? I've got no more fear. I'm happy now. And that is where we abandon the search. This is why the masters keep telling us, don't stop when you feel bliss. But this is usually where we stop. I have a friend who once said, I only do sadhana when I'm in trouble. When I'm feeling happy, I don't do any sadhana. And this is it, because most of us are only following a spiritual life because we are trying to get rid of pain. And once it's got rid of, we don't pursue anything. So here's the danger. At this point, we may abandon the search. And what is still remains, though, is asmita, the ego. The ego is still there. There's someone who's experiencing this bliss. And as long as that someone, that ego is there, ego here means I, the I thought, then all the rest can come up. As we know, in the Yoga Sutras, you have the 5 afflictions. Asmita, first, of course, avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha. So we've actually moved from the abhinivesha through the vichara. We've moved from the abhinivesha And we have gone through and dispelled, the vichara dispels the raga dvesha. And then it comes to an experience of ananda, which is coupled with this asmita, the I that experiences this bliss. And because this I is still alive, the raga dvesha can come again, and therefore the abhinivesha can come again. That is actually the problem if we don't continue to pursue. So the pursuit has to continue. What is the I? What is the I? And Swamiji says that is as far as the search can go in terms of this individual self-effort. Because the I, or the true nature of this I, can only be dispelled by God's grace. Why is that so? Because I cannot remove I. The ego cannot remove the ego. It is not possible, because the act of the ego trying to remove the ego, that's the ego, it's still there. That is why when we say, oh, I've got no ego, who is saying that? It's the ego. What we mean to say, actually, I don't have pride. Maybe that's true. But the ego is still there. Ego means literally I. It's a Latin word. It means I. So the I cannot remove the I, but the I is aware of the I, pursuing and trying to see directly, through direct observation. No more thinking at this point. Direct observation. What is this I? Then, with grace, the reality of this I is revealed. That is called samadhi in this sutra, which really means the dispelling of the I. And in the what we've been hearing by other Swamijis, that it is the experience of, or it is the revelation of the absolute reality, which is Brahman, or Atman, the self, the kingdom of God, whatever word we want to use, that is revealed. And so the beauty of this whole thing is that what was at the beginning experienced as fear, as a terrible thing, becomes the pathway really, or becomes a tool, an aid to self-realization. And even if one has not been able to get to the samadhi point, if one can at least get rid of the self-images and the samskaras and attain some peace, even that is a great boon. Even if we should make the mistake of stopping at the ananda, that is still better than sitting with a fear problem. And then for the yogi who has entered into the samadhi state, there's no problem to know what to do or what not to do. You don't need a government to tell you, because God is telling you. God, or Brahman, or the Atman, actually is here, the spring, as Swamiji would call it, the spring of action, the impulse of action. It knows at every moment what is, in the words of Swamiji, appropriate action. Not right action in the sense of right or wrong, because this is our dilemma right now. What is the right or wrong thing to do? I don't know whether any of you, any of us have been reading this scientist's point of view, that scientist's point of view, and this group's point of view, and that point of view, what to do, wear masks, don't wear masks, do this, do not do that, all these contradictory points of view. What is right, what is wrong? It's all intellect, therefore all confusion. But and this Swami Amritananda Rupananda Mataji alluded to this yesterday, or mentioned this yesterday in a talk, that from that space there's always right action. This is the whole thing. There will be absolutely clear, unconfused knowledge of what is right action, the appropriate action. And that is a moment-to-moment thing. Swami Vidyananda explains it. It's a moment-to-moment thing. It is not an application of anything. It is a moment-to-moment. In this moment, this action is appropriate. In that moment, this action is appropriate. So if we can take the context, for example, it may be in this context, mask. In this context, no mask. How do I know? Not by the brain, not by the intellect, not by applying any one's else's knowledge. It comes from the Atman itself, because this Atman resides in that self, person there. Is one Atman. The self or Brahman resides here, resides there, resides in between, resides in the situation, resides in the coronavirus itself. It is there everywhere. And the one who is at one with that, whose intellect has been surrendered, because in this pursuit, actually, that intellect gets surrendered. That means it merges with the divine, that there is appropriate action. There will be no confusion. Therefore, there's no challenge. There's no challenge. I'm not challenged. I'm challenged in the sense I don't know what to do. You will certainly, it's not I know what to do. Knowledge acts. Truth acts in this situation. Through this body-mind complex towards all the other body-mind complexes who are all united by this. We will know what to do. So the key really is we have to discover the reality. We have to discover the truth. Death is the great guru. If we utilize this to turn within and try to discover the reality regarding this thing. This is what Swami Gurudev talked about, the Nachiketas element, the relentless pursuit of truth. It is not only that he was a great renunciate, he didn't want the things that Lord Yama offered him. No, that is only one side of it. The other is that he had a relentless pursuit for truth. Is there immortality? Is there immortality? That is what is most important. I see there are some questions, I think. I don't know. So I have to put my glasses on to see. So if it's permissible, I see. No, I think this was not meant for me. So the relentless pursuit of truth. The relentless pursuit of truth, Swami Venkateswara points out, in this particular process of vichara, purifies the mind, purifies our heart, purifies our intellect. And what is important to understand is when there's this purification, doubt disappears. Doubt is on account of impurities. Impurity is not, we don't mean impurities in a limited sense of negativities. Impurity is any vritti, any thought structure, any belief system, any ideology, any theory is really an impurity because it is a vritti. It is an action in the mind, it's a modification of the mind. And when that is there, we cannot know, we cannot see clearly. So in this pursuit, we will be able to enter into that. And the mind will become more and more transparent. And as the mind becomes more transparent, the truth gets revealed. The truth of who we are, but the truth of life. What is really going on and how to respond. This is true. This inquiry, we now focus on our own death. But this is also an inquiry we can do in regards to the death of others. The same kind of pursuit, because when we can see again, there's certain things or certain phenomena in us regarding the death of others. Again, we can ask the question, is it possible to avoid the death of someone else? Someone I love, will they not die? COVID-19, no COVID-19, will others not die? And this question we should ask, it's such an important question. We should prepare ourselves. To not prepare oneself for the death of others, to me, seems to be rather foolish. Because the moment will come. And if I'm not prepared in some way, Prepared, I mean psychologically, inwardly. Then it comes at a great shock. But if we are able to really prepare ourselves through this kind of process, we can be fully there for the other. If I may use a sort of personal example, this was happening when my mother was dying. She gave me the news, I've got a year to live. She received the death sentence. There was no feeling in me to stop her from dying. But in place of that was the feeling, what can I do to serve her? And that if our resistance to death is gone, actually, naturally, it's not even my thought, it is natural. The willingness, the wish to serve comes. The wish to make the other person comfortable arises from within. And you serve. And you help. And you do what you can do to make that person more comfortable. Again, it is not, please do not misunderstand me that I'm in any way trying to make out we shouldn't observe any of these things. But let us use this opportunity where death is staring us in the face, our own death and the possibility of the death of others, to go within and to get reconciled with death. I really loved this expression of Swami Vidyananda Maharaj that Mataji shared with us. I am reconciled to all of life. And one of our devotees at the ashram actually sent me a WhatsApp, and it also really struck her. It is a wonderful statement. That is really the mark of an enlightened person. They are reconciled. Are we reconciled truly in the very depths of our being with death? My feeling is that if we are truly, none of life would be a problem to us. And ask any dying person whether any of the problems are important. Now for us, many problems seem to be more important than death. That's only because we're not really facing it. Ask a person. And ask the persons who are reconciled with death how important the problems of life are to them. They're not. They don't pose problems. As I always say, a problem is only a problem because I think it is a problem. If my car breaks down, it's a problem for me, not for the mechanic. It's not a problem. You'll say, no problem, Swamiji. Because he's got the knowledge. I don't have the knowledge. So life's so-called challenges or life situations are only a problem because I don't know anything about it. I don't know I don't understand it, and therefore I don't know how to deal with it. But these problems will not be there. We will not experience life as a problem when we are reconciled to this most important fact in our lives, which is death. There's so much uncertainty in our life, but this is the only certainty. Sri Krishna points it out in the Bhagavad Gita. Certain is death. Even if you don't believe in a God, you don't believe in a self, says Sri Krishna, you don't believe in anything spiritual, death is certain. So let us get reconciled. It's like a God-given opportunity, really, for us to be reconciled with this important factor in life. And the beauty of it is, although in the beginning it may be anxiety-provoking, it may be fear-provoking, the beauty of it is it will lead towards peace. It will lead towards harmony. It will lead towards wisdom. It will lead towards love. All these great qualities that we have or wish for, that we work for, they will naturally flower and blossom in each one of us when we pursue this path of vichara. I hope that I have been able to share properly something of what Swami Venkatesananda may have shared with us. And I noticed also some of his disciples are here with us today. So I would be very keen to be wrapped over the knuckles if I misrepresented anything. I think there's a question. When Atman resides in everybody, why do people not behave responsibly during this pandemic? Follow the new norms, at least for the sake of others. Well, as I mentioned just now, the question itself, with all due respect, is still in the intellect. See, I have heard from someone that this is the way to behave, and therefore I behave accordingly. Someone else has maybe heard a different story, and they're behaving according to that. Both are in the intellect. So, the only way and this is not really knowing what to do or not to do. It is simply listening to somebody else, which may be reasonable, which may be correct, etc., etc. But from the spiritual point of view, and I'm not saying don't observe the government's rules. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying the opposite either. I'm not saying either of these two things. What we want to go beyond this. Of course, not all human beings may be enlightened and lead an enlightened life, but there's not much we can do about that. And we can definitely not know why others are behaving in the way they are behaving, because all behavior that is not enlightened is according to the samskaras. And we all have these samskaras in us, and we all have contradictory samskaras in us also. This is the whole thing. We may say we may even want to follow this, but there will be also certain circumstances where we may ourselves allow exceptions to it. What is that exception? My other samskara, my desire samskara will make some exception to this. So we can never really know why somebody else is doing something or not doing something. But we can certainly know one thing. We can begin to know why we are doing something or not doing something. Is the action from within me proceeding from the ego, or is it proceeding from God? We were discussing this question earlier. I know I'm going over time, so it's just due to the question, otherwise I was going to be finished. We can know. We may not be able to know whether the action was prompted by God, but we can certainly find out whether it was prompted by the ego. That is all we need to know. Is this an ego prompted? And if we don't know whether it was ego prompted, is there a desire behind it? Is there a motive behind it? Is there attraction behind it or aversion behind it? That much we can know. And this is the beginning of the inquiry every time. So we should be less worried about what others are doing. Unless you want to be a politician, then you can worry about what others are doing. But otherwise, make sure that what you are doing is prompted by the divine, or at least brings you closer to the divine, and that you're not doing that which is prompted by the ego. I think that is the most important thing in these questions. Whenever we see other people doing things that we don't approve of, first thing we should do is look at ourselves. Am I doing things that others don't approve of? Am I always following all the rules? Maybe not in this case, but in other cases. Then we will begin to understand. When we begin to understand our own mind through the inquiry, we will understand the minds of others also. And then maybe there will be compassion and no judgment. This is important. So, yes, thank you again, Swami Amritananda, Rupananda Mataji, for inviting us here from Ananda Kutir Ashrama to be part of the celebration. It's so wonderful because today Swamiji Venkatesananda's birthday will be the 99th birthday. We're starting today with the birth centenary. Of course, not in such glory as you would have liked to because of the lockdowns. But this is the first item actually offered at the feet of Sri Swami Venkatesananda for his birth centenary. And we at Ananda Kutir feel very blessed and happy that Sivananda Ashram has made this possible for us. And so we are really, really extremely happy. Thank you all for participating in the retreat, and also this afternoon, or here it's afternoon in Cape Town, it's afternoon, on a nice warm summer's day. So we pray for the blessings of Sri Gurudev and all his illustrious disciples and all saints and sages to guide us in our path towards this great reality, which is the key to overcoming sorrow and so on. So let us conclude with the Vedic prayer. Asato ma satkamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityo ma mritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tatsapamarpanamastu.